guys, it's Alice, and today I'm going to talk about the books I read in the last part of July. The first book that I finished was Morningstar by Pierce Brown. This is a science fiction dystopia, and it's the third book in the Red Rising trilogy. I very much enjoyed this, and I feel like this was a suitable and satisfactory ending to this trilogy. I think the writing in this is really good, and I think that the pace of it worked really well, and it was a lot better paced than the previous book, which was Golden Sun. I loved reading about our main characters and seeing them try to navigate everything that was going on, and the story takes some really dark turns sometimes, which I really liked. I think that the balance between action and more quiet periods worked really well in this, and I loved the different settings in here, especially the part where they go to this like ice planet. Like, I loved that part. It's not without faults though. Like, I feel like there are way too many characters in here and it's kind of difficult to keep track of all of them, especially because some of them are really poorly developed. I also think some of the scenes in here dragged out a little bit, and I wasn't particularly surprised by the ending. Like, I feel like it ended in the only way it could have, although I was surprised by how they got there, which was great. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars, and I feel like overall this series is well worth the read if you like the idea of dystopian novels set in space. It is kind of like YA, especially the first book, but it feels like a mature version of YA. Like, it's a lot more violent and a little darker than a lot of the other dystopian YA novels that I've read. So I kind of feel like anyone of any age could enjoy these books. It is more plot heavy and sort of filled with action more than it is focused on the characters. So if that's your jam, these are great. Secondly, I read Yesterday I Was the Moon by Noor Unahar. This is a poetry collection, and in it the author explores her own cultural background, the idea of home, loss, and art. I was very impressed by this and I really, really liked it. I don't really know what I expected from this, but I feel like this almost caught me a little bit off guard, but in a good way. I think this collection starts off a little bit wavering, for lack of a better word, and I think that towards the middle is where it sort of gets stronger and it gets a little bit more sure of itself. I loved the poems in here that were about home and the idea of building yourself up and the importance of art. And if I was going to compare this writing style to any other poets that I've read, I think the closest is probably Rupi Kaur, who is one of my favorite poets. There are also drawings scattered throughout this book that I feel like complemented the poetry really well, and it sort of splits up the collection in a really nice way. And overall, I really, really like this, and I feel like it's well worth the read if you like modern poetry, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read an ebook, and it was Quackery by Lydia Kang and Nate Peterson. This is a nonfiction book, and the full title of this is Quackery, A Brief History of the Worst Ways to Cure Everything. And I really do feel like that sums it up perfectly. This was very entertaining, and it's the kind of book that's perfect to sort of read a bit in here and there. I think medical history is really interesting, and I love reading about the weird things that people have done to try and fix their problems, and this sort of breaks it down in really easy to understand and digestible pieces. I felt like this was very informative without being dry, and it is written in quite a humorous way. Like, it's quite funny, and at the end of a paragraph, most likely there's going to be some sort of joke, and I feel like that makes it more enjoyable and a little bit lighter, but I think maybe they went a little overboard with it. Like, there is too much of it, and towards the end it just got kind of annoying. Overall though, this was fun and entertaining, and I feel like I learned quite a lot from it, some of which was kind of gross but also fascinating. I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars, and I think it's worth the read if you find the topic interesting. And I think my favorite part in this book, and like one of my favorite things that they used to believe, was that the uterus would wander around in the body and like cause havoc, and they would have to try and lure it back into place. I don't know why, but I just think that is hilarious. Second to last, I finished The Killing of Polly Carter by Robert Thorogood. This is a mystery novel, and it's the second book in the Death in Paradise series, and in this, a world-famous supermodel has apparently committed suicide by throwing herself off a cliff. But then, Detective Richard Poole and his team start to investigate, and it is, of course, murder. Honestly, this was just so much fun to read, and I really enjoyed it. I love these types of cozy mysteries, and I feel like this book has everything in it to sort of do the genre proud. We've got a great team of detectives in this, we've got a setting that is magnificent, and a mystery that is really intriguing, even if it isn't the most original. It's also funny without trying too hard, and then it gets dark when it needs to be. One of my complaints, or one of the things that I mentioned about the first book in the series, was that I felt like the characters weren't as well developed as they should be, but I found that in this book, it didn't really bother me, or I didn't really notice that at all. I felt like I already kind of knew them and I was just revisiting them, and I felt like they sort of came into their own through their actions, if that makes sense. And I just feel like it worked a little bit better in this for some reason. I just love reading about the detective in these books. He is just so funny because he's so hot and bothered and he's so lost, but he's also this great detective, and I just love reading about him and his team, and I just enjoyed this so much that I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Lastly, I finished The Sound of Things Falling by Juan Gabriel Vasquez, and this is translated from Spanish by Anne McLean. This is literary fiction. It's set in Bogota, and it's about this man who reads a newspaper article, and because of it, he recalls his friendship with this mysterious man that was killed many years before at the height of Colombia's drug trade. I quite like this book, and there are some things that I think are amazing about it and some that are less so. My favorite thing by far about this is the writing. It's poetic and beautiful, and it conjures up people and place in just a few sentences. And it's a book filled with emotion, and I feel like the writing captures it so well. It's an important and profound story in and of itself, but the writing makes it more so. I really liked the setting of this as well, and how we got to see this country through a very tumultuous time, and how that affected all of the people who are just sort of stuck in the middle of it. Now, when I started reading this, I was initially really intrigued by all of the characters, but I found that towards like the middle end, my interest waned a little bit, and I was honestly a little bit bored, I'm not gonna lie. I think that the whole story is kind of quiet and a little sad, and it has a melancholy vibe to it, and I usually don't mind that, but I just felt like towards the end it was a little bit overwhelming, and I didn't really like that. I do think this is worth the read though, and I'm glad that I read it, and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, and I would absolutely love to read more of this author's work because the writing really is amazing. Now onto what I am currently reading. I have got this nonfiction book called Chasing the Screen by Johan Hari, which is about the search for the truth about addiction, and this is so interesting so far. And then I have also just started The Lost Man by Jane Harper, which is a mystery thriller set in Australia. Okay guys, those were all the books that I had to talk about today. I'd love to know what you guys have been reading lately and your thoughts on those books, and I will see you soon. Bye!